Fun Ideas Productions presents the Fun Ideas Podcast.
This is the Slow Poisoner. I come to you from the future with these words of warning.
It's a hot horror planet. 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 Living in science fiction. Past the point of no returning. We got high on gasoline. And we blew the scene.
Hi, this is Mark Arnold, and welcome to Fun Ideas Podcast number 94. This episode is sponsored by the fine folks at Lee's Comics. Attention comic book fans, Lee's Comics of Mountain View, California has closed. But here's the good news. Lee's Comics eBay store is still going strong with over 10,000 vintage comics, the majority of which are now on sale, for half off. Choose from Lee's huge stock of golden, silver, bronze, and modern age comics, and specializing in Silver Age Marvel titles. You can count on friendly service, accurate grading, and quick, secure shipping backed by a money-back guarantee. To check out Lee's eBay store, go to eBay. Click Advanced Search to the left of the search bar, scroll down to Sellers, and enter Lee's Comics Inc., period. That's LeeScomics period. Don't forget the period. Lee's Comics is shipping daily with no delays. New items daily. Mention the Fun Ideas Podcast and get a free bonus gift.
Long title, Looking for the Good Times, Examining the Monkey Song One by One, by Michael A. Ventrella and Mark Arnold. A book that examines each song, gives lots of details about each song, and our own personal opinions. You can find this book on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, and anywhere where good books are being sold. Our webpage is wordpress.monkeys.com, where you can see many of the songs and give your own opinions of them. And we will be discussing this more on Zilch.
Hey Michael, it says here we've written another book about the monkeys. Wasn't the first one enough?
Not at all, Mark. Our original book, Looking for the Good Times, Examining the Monkey Songs One by One, was very successful, but only covered half the story.
Which half?
The group half. Our new book, Headquartered, A Timeline of the Monkeys' Solo Years, covers the solo half.
Who knew the monkeys record so many solo albums?
Not only that, but this book covers all of their solo projects, including stage shows, horse racing, running record labels, directing and starring in TV shows and movies, voice acting, and jail.
Jail? Did the monkeys go to jail?
You have to read the book to find out.
You sold me. Have you sold them?
Who's them?
Those people out there listening to this.
Well, listen to this. This book has discographies, photos, and other information about the Prefab Four, Mickey, Davey, Peter, and Mike, the Solo Monkeys, plus another nifty cover by Scott Schaub.
Wow, he did our last cover. And this one's equally good. Where can you get this masterpiece?
Announcer.
Announcer? That's me. Get Headquartered, a timeline of the monkey solo years, written by Michael A. Ventrella and Mark Arnold. Those two guys. It's available in hardback, paperback, or ebook from BearManorMedia.com or from Amazon. Get your copies today.
Cool. I'm going to get one today. I'm still plugging away on my Mad and Disney books, and there's no real news about my Warren Kremer book or my TTV scrapbook, but the holidays are coming up, so you can order my other books as gifts. There's books about Harvey Comics, Archie Comics, The Beatles, Dennis the Menace, Cracked, Disney, Patty Freeling, Total Television, Jack Davis, John Severin, and the Monkees. You can order my books on Amazon or through the Bear Manor Media website. Thank you very much. Today we feature one of the biggest fans of EC Comics, the people who brought you Tales from the Crypt, Weird Science, and Mad. Here he is, Thommy Burns. On the phone today, we have Thommy Burns. How are you, sir?
I'm very good. How are you, Mark?
I'm doing well. So I usually start off by asking, tell me a little bit about yourself, and in your case, how you got into EC Comics.
Well, a little bit about myself. So I am a child of the 60s, just barely. I was born in the summer of 1969, so I like to say I was still together while the Beatles were officially still together. But the EC Comics thing kind of has come to define my interests because it's what I've specialized in and focused on. And when I was 10 years old, I discovered the Nostalgia Press book called EC Horror Comics of the 1950s or the EC Horror Library, depending on whether or not you're looking at the cover or the spine of it. And my nickname for it with my little brother Josh was the Big Book, and it had a huge influence on us. It was our introduction to EC Comics, and it's an interest that, interests kind of come and go, and as you age, you get in and out of different things, and you go through phases. But EC Comics was the one thing that I never really outgrew, and that I maintained a high level of interest in throughout my life. So it's been, at this point, 40 years worth of EC collecting for me.
Wow. Now, how long was it before you got the Big Book, between that and actually obtaining either a reprint or an actual EC comic from the 50s?
Well, it's funny because I got the Big Book from the library, and we kind of devoured that. And in the inside flap of it, it's got a picture of Bill Gaines as he appeared in 1971. And it mentioned him publishing Mad Magazine. And so I was able to make that connection. And I wasn't allowed to buy Mad Magazine. So my parents felt like Cracked was okay, but that Mad was a pretty insidious influence. And Mad was not allowed in the house. But I found one of those Mad magazines that had a nostalgic Mad bound in. And I realized this is an EC comic. So that was actually my first EC comic, was the Nostalgic Mad number 8. And I believe it was in the fall of 1980, super special. Whenever that came out, I found it at People's Drug, and I was so excited to see a real EC comic of sorts. Yeah. And that was my first one. After that, I did get a few EC comics reprints from East Coast Comics, and that was, I'd say, about a year after I discovered the Big Book. We're talking around 1980, 81, because I do distinctly remember getting my first real original EC comic in 1981 at a comic convention that my folks took me to. So for all of their disapproval of Mad Magazine, they really weren't unsupportive of the comic collecting, and they did take us to comic conventions and things. And so I've been buying original EC comics and amassing that collection since 1981.
Now, were they looking in your EC comics? Obviously, they said Mad was a no-no. Did they look at any of the Tales from the Crypts, even the reprints, or even in the Big Book? I mean, it's like, there's some nasty shit in there a little bit,
So, yeah, my father was not okay with it, and I have a distinct memory from the 70s of, I was like a lot of kids in the 70s, and we would go around with piles of comic books and go to the front doorsteps and trade comic books, and I ended up with a House of Mystery comic, and when my father found it, he said, horror comics? I thought they banned these. So that stigma about horror comics was lingering for another 20 years afterwards with my father. My mother, on the other hand, remembered reading EC Comics with her friends when she was growing up in Pennsylvania, and it was very familiar to her, and she didn't object, and she also would read the EC Comics that we would bring home, and they brought back a lot of memories for her. So she voted down my father because it was my little brother and I, and then my mother was on our side, so we got to read EC Horror Comics.
Wow. See, I never had such darn luck like that. It's like my parents were like very open to anything I read, and I'll tell you my story briefly. So I'm a few years older than you. I was born in '66. The first Mad I got was the Super Special 14 that had these crazy Don Martin posters in 1974. And we were just at the grocery store, and my sister pointed it out. She says, "Look at this guy's artwork. It's crazy." And I go, "Wow." And I went to my mom, "Can we buy this?" And she goes, "Okay." So that was my first exposure to Mad.
There was no objection.
No. And then when I brought it home, my dad looked at it, and he says, well, I read Mad when I was a kid. Now, my dad has been known, he's still around, but my dad's been known to tell an occasional tall tale, or exaggeration. So I didn't believe him. Because I said, wow, this is way too hip for the room here. And, because I was thinking 70s Mad was what was on in the what they were making in the 50s. So, and I said, this can't possibly be true, especially because the Super Special's number 14, I didn't know there's a whole bunch of earlier annuals and other things. And then I got my first regular issues, 172, even though I saw a few other ones. I think the actual first one I saw was the finger cover. But I knew that was like pushing.
Well, that to make an impression.
Yeah, I knew I probably couldn't get my mom to buy that one. That was a little push. So, I waited until there was like a pretty harmless cover. But they were pretty lenient on things. I mean, within a year I was buying Lampoon and everything else. So it's like, but I didn't know. So anyway, but then I like you, the next Super Special had one of those nostalgic Mad reprints in there. And it was number 3. It had Frankenstein and Little Orphan Melvin and a couple others I can't remember off the top of my head. But and I showed it to my dad, and he goes, "That's what I used to read." And I go, "Oh."
It all makes sense now.
Yeah, maybe you weren't lying or exaggerating. He goes, "No, it was a comic book." And my dad said, yeah. I said, "So why did you stop reading Mad?" Because, see, I've never stopped. I've been reading it since I was 7. So
yeah.
I said, "Stop reading comics? What caused that?" He goes, "Well, I didn't like it when it switched to a magazine." And I could see his point because, I mean, that must have been a real shock going from issue 23 to suddenly this big black and white quarter 25-cent thing, that has lots of text and,
very different stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it evolved into, something different and greater, but it's like, I'm sure that was a big jar to the average reader, so they probably lost a lot of readers at that time, as well as gaining a bunch of readers. I don't know. So, but
it's a whole different audience, I think, and it's funny because I think we had the experience that so many have had of many different generations of that revelation that Mad was a 10-cent comic book. That discovery, I think any of us that are still into this, whether it's from a aesthetic or historical or whatever our interest is, pop culture, it's just that moment when you realize, oh, shit, Mad was a 10-cent comic book. That's how it started. And then putting the pieces together. And for me to realize that so many of these, because I had the experience in reverse that I think a lot of people who have gotten into EC Comics by way of Mad had, is that I started with the interest in EC Comics. So when I was recognizing Jack Davis or Wallace Wood or Joe Orlando, or it was in reverse, I knew them from EC, and then I went, oh shit, they drew for Mad. And it was years later till I realized, okay, Gaines and Feldstein, and it's all part of the same family, but putting those puzzle pieces together is it's something that we all have in common, but I think we all came about it in slightly different ways,
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned Jack Davis. Jack Davis, when he was in Mad, I said, "Hey, this is the guy who draws for Time Magazine and TV Guide and Sesame Street." It's like I knew him from other things. I didn't know him from Mad. It's like, and for some reason, I didn't know that the Jack Davis. This is how dumb I was as a kid. The Jack Davis currently drawing, we're talking about 75, 76, in Mad, was the same Jack Davis that was in the early Mads way back in the 50s, and also was in the horror comics. It's like, is this really the same guy? I didn't. It's like, how does that work? Well,
it's funny because my brother-in-law was slightly older than me, so in the early 80s, he saw the Tales from the Crypt covers and did the same thing. He went, wait, because Jack Davis was ubiquitous in the 70s. He was everywhere.
Yeah.
And he looked at it and went, is that how this guy got started? And at the time, I didn't know. I just went, well, while he was working back then, he did Tales from the Crypt. Yeah. Everybody knows that, but now we know, of course, that is really where he got his big start. He did a lot of earlier work and advertising work and things, while he was in the Navy or at college. But Tales from the Crypt, he really didn't have a lot of professional experience before he started with the EC Horror Comics.
Right.
And so it's so funny to see him go, I know this guy. This guy's everywhere,
Now, when, I did see the big book around, and I've heard this story before, and I think it is true, is it remaindered at a higher price than what it originally was sold at. And so I remember seeing it like in the mid to late 70s at stores like Gemco and stuff like that. And so I'd always like peruse it, but my parents didn't want to spend that money. It was 25 or 30 bucks or something, which was a lot of money back in the 70s. Not so much now, but it's like, yeah.
Well, it was really unusual because it was remaindered, and if not at a higher price, I know it was a full price where you never found bargain copies of it.
Right.
And initially, and Nostalgia Press had advertised it, I think, at like $11.95 or something. And when it came out, it was $19.95. So you're talking almost 20 bones for that was a lot of money. I don't know how, I'm not going to do the math on adjusting for inflation, but what you can get it for now that people talk about, I found a copy for 80 or 100 bucks, is probably adjusted less than it was when it came out brand new.
Yeah. I always say most prices from them is probably 10 times as much. So yeah, $100 now,
Yeah, and it was one that I checked out from the library often because I could have never afforded to buy a copy at 10 years old.
I think I checked it out of the library, but I think I only checked it out maybe once or twice, and then it mysteriously vanished. So I know somebody stole it. It didn't last in my library very long. So, well.
If you got a copy now, you must have a copy.
I do have a copy now, but I only bought it a couple of years ago. I said I should buy one of these. It's like I've always wanted it, and then it just kind of, it was either insanely high, like mine has like pieces out on the dust jacket, but at least it's complete, and so I'm happy with it. I mean,
well, the dust jackets are notorious for self-destructing. It's very hard to find the dust jacket, and I don't know what kind of paper it's printed on, but they get shredded. It took me a while to find one with a really pristine dust jacket.
Right. And, the ones I was seeing that were pristine, I've seen them for like $300, $400, and I go, I don't want to spend that much on this book, even though, I mean, one thing you'll know about me is like, you guys on this EC fan page, the Fan Addict page on Facebook, you're all saying, "Oh, it's a bargain. It's only $300." It's like, shit. I've only spent close to that once in my life, and it was for Mad #1. I paid $400 for it, and the only reason I did is my friend Lee of Lee's Comics. He says, "Mark,
he's a cool guy."
Yeah, he says, "Mark, you have every issue. You need #1," and I go, I have the reprint, I have the Cochran set, I have the, it's like I have the Millennium one. He goes, yeah, but you don't have an original. And he's like flashing it in my face. And he made this incredible deal. He says, look, I'll buy it back from you for whatever you paid for it. So if you ever get in a money crunch, of course I'm not going to do that now, but it's been a few years. But at the time,
so you knew you wouldn't be out that money.
Yeah. And he says, I'll let you buy it on time. And I go, all right, so he kept a little chart, and I'd give him $50 here, $40 here, and then finally, I think I got a tax refund, and I got a couple $100. Finally paid it off. It took me about a year to do it, and
well, I'll tell you that at today's prices for those original comics, my brother and I, in the 80s, we were fixated on completing the horror titles, and we weren't really interested in getting anything else. So we did complete Tales from the Crypt, Vault of Horror, Haunt of Fear, crime suspense stories, and shock suspense stories. And then for a long while, many years, those were the only 5 titles I had complete. And I would read and enjoy them. I wasn't, much of a preservationist. And I've still got all of those comics. It wasn't until recently that I started buying everything else. So Mad #1 is the only comic Mad I don't have. I've got 2 through 23, and I don't have 1, and I just keep watching the prices escalate beyond where, technically, I guess I could afford a copy, but it just seems ridiculous to me after buying all those Tales from the Crypts and things in the 80s to pay what a Mad #1 commands
so now. You know where I'm at, because, I bought all my Mads. Yeah, I bought all my Mads way back when for $1 and stuff like that. I mean, I paid a little bit more for like number 24 through 30, let's say, and assorted.
Wasn't it was your Mad Comics in the ECR show, the big show in Eugene, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, my Mad #1 through 4 were in there. And
so that comic Lee sold you was in an art show.
Yes, it was.
There you go.
And he knew about it. He didn't come up to see it, but I took photos, and I said, look. And unfortunately, we didn't get to meet at that show, because I was planning to go to the get-together that everyone had, and it just bums me out that I just didn't force myself. But I was exhausted because the night before, they had a party for the museum and everybody, which everybody else didn't go to. And we stayed out really late eating dinner and doing other things. And even though...
Yeah, I remember I was a little... I was disgruntled that I had missed a preview party, but most of us, as you know, all the Fanatic Club members flew out the next day.
Yeah.
And I think I talked to you at the time, and you had said, I'm really sorry I missed you guys, but I was so worn out.
Yeah. And, so I didn't see that little Wally Wood setup or whatever, and I didn't meet everyone face to face and everything like that. I'm like, wow,
Yeah, it was funny timing because we were there for the, I guess it was the opening night. It was the opening night.
Yeah.
And you had been there the night before and all leading up to that. And I know we were in touch that day, and you had said, I'm exhausted.
Yes, and which is not like me usually. I mean, usually I can kind of force myself to go, but I was just like, I was not feeling it. And for some reason, I thought there was going to be more, although I did do more things. I mean, I did attend some of the guest speakers,
well, you did
and
a talk on that, right?
And I even did a talk on Kurtzman. So,
yeah.
So I got my. Whatever out of it, but it's like it just was like
you probably actually got to enjoy the show more than we did because we all kind of we pined for the fact that we all flown in and it was a whirlwind and it was so dizzying, and then we all flew home because we were just there for the weekend, if that, and it was there was not much time to really drink it in because it was an overwhelming display.
Yeah, it was, and I didn't know what they were going to do. I mean, my story with it is, I moved to Oregon in 2015, and they had a comic convention shortly after, and there's a sign saying, we need your artwork and samples and anything to do with EC because we're putting an art show in 2016. And I go, oh, cool, And so I did a little research. I called around and I got in contact with Ben Samuels, and he's the one putting it on. And he says, yeah, what do you got? And I go, well, I don't have any original artwork, but I do have some comics, and I have Seduction of the Innocent, which made it into the show, and some paperbacks.
Oh, that was yours too?
Yeah, that was mine too. And so I didn't, and those are all my paperbacks, I think. I know I put Mad Reader in there, but maybe I didn't get all those other ones. I don't remember. And then I did have Mad 1 through 4 and Mad 24 in there. I'd have to look. And they had for the longest time, it seemed like, because after the show closed, it wasn't like, here it is, but they were very careful with it and everything like that. And, I really liked how they did, and they explained how that museum is actually a very secure museum, and they explained everything, and I go, whoa, okay, and he says, not all museums have this.
It's very legit.
Yeah. And
I mean, the way it was presented, it did feel like EC and Mad were in a real art museum. It wasn't just a little display someone threw together,
And I had discovered the museum only a short time earlier, and they had original Shakespeare folios, and those were so, whatever, that they had a security guard standing right next to it. They didn't want anybody touching those things. So,
yeah, that seems like those could be a little rare. Maybe slightly more than a Mad number 1.
Yes, and even though the thing was in a case, they didn't want anybody tampering with anything, so they had an armed guard standing right next to it, and I was like, whoa,
Well, we were, because I was there with another EC Fanatic Club member and an old friend of mine named Sean, and we both have tattoos of that Kurtzman vampire from Mad number 3. So we were trying to arrange ourselves with the original art for Mad number 3, so you could see our tattoos and the original cover. And at one point I got too close to it, I guess, and someone did come up and say, I need you to stand back from the artwork. And, I had to temper my umbrage with a little understanding because I know, it's an art museum, but at the same time, our excitement level was kind of through the roof.
Yeah.
But they held on to your stuff for a while? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, because they wanted to take photos and everything else and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, I wasn't upset. It's just that, it's the timing of everything. It's like, you're all ready to pick it up, and it's like, nope, we still need it for a little while longer. Is that all right? I go, I guess so.
I wonder how guys, because I wondered about, Jim Halpern and Roger Hill and Grant Geisman and these guys who loaned one-of-a-kind original pieces of artwork. And, they did say they crated them up very carefully, and then, they personally came and picked them up. And then, but the whole process of being without that stuff would have made me very nervous.
Yeah. Do you know the one person that didn't return the phone calls, and so his piece of artwork did not make it in the show? Steven Spielberg.
It would have been nice to have Mad #1.
Yeah, they tried. Ben said he tried. He got hold of Spielberg's secretary or assistant or whatever, and he said, "Well, we're trying," But Steven, I guess, wasn't interested. So I don't know where he keeps it. He keeps it in the loo or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess if you're Steven Spielberg, you can do whatever you want with the Mad #1 art. But correct me if I'm wrong, but they had almost every other, or at least they had every issue of Mad represented with some piece of original art. Glenn Ray had some covers in there, and I was excited to see the ones I really wanted to see, but I think almost everything was there.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, the ones that weren't, obviously, were the ones that no longer exist. So, I mean, due to fire and, everything like that. And I don't know the story. Maybe you don't know this. Is the original cover artwork for Mad #8. I know John Putnam had to redraw it for the nostalgic Mad reprint. He did a pretty good job, but
he did a great job. There's a few differences that you can tell, like there's a falling brick where the proportions aren't quite right, and the Kurtzman signature isn't quite right. I've studied that thing practically with a magnifying glass, and there's some subtle differences, but I don't know where the original. I don't think anyone knows where the original art went. That was one of those odd situations where they went to photograph the original art for Nostalgic Mad, and Gaines had full issues together, so you'd pull out an envelope of all of one issue, and it had the cover and all 4 stories, and that one was missing.
Yeah.
And so they had Putnam redo it for the Nostalgic Mad that it was on, and then Russ Cochran didn't know that it had been redone. Oh. And there was a huge kind of an uproar where the original art was offered, and then it was pulled, and then it was relisted as a recreation, but then subsequently it surfaced again being represented as the original. Yeah. And I'll be honest, I don't know that whole story, and I wish I did, because it sounds like it's filled with espionage and intrigue, because the cover for Mad #8 that exists, that is out there, is as you know, it's a redo from the 70s.
Right.
But I don't think anyone knows where and there were a few pieces of VCR, so for Mad Comics, that's the big one that was missing, but Johnny Craig had to redo quite a few of his covers for Vault of Horror, and John Severin redid some of the Two-Fisted Tales covers, because there was cover art that was just found to be missing from the Gaines vault, and no one knew quite what had happened to it.
Now, has any artwork ever been recovered post Cochran's book? Okay.
Yes.
All right. I don't know all this. Okay.
That's a few odd stories, and that's what gives me hope that some of this stuff may be out there, because one of my absolute favorite EC horror covers is for Vault of Horror #18, and it's where the corpse is coming out of the wishing well, and the guy and the girl are about to kiss, and that was recreated by Johnny Craig for Russ Cochran's EC horror library, or for EC, the complete EC library, and that has never surfaced. And I'm just waiting for it to emerge sometime, just to come back from the grave, right? Because there was a Johnny Craig cover, and it was War Against Crime #3. You can tell if you look at the Crime Patrol and War Against Crime library set that Russ put out, that is a kind of lesser quality. Well, it was reproduced from a print comic. Since then, the original art turned up at a small southern auction within the last... since I started the Fan Addict Club on Facebook, and that was in 2013, so it was within the last probably 5 or 6 years. That original artwork turned up with very dated-looking 60s framing on it, and God knows how it ended up in a private collection decades ago. But it was missing from the games vault, and it's since resurfaced. Another big one was one of the ones that John Severin had recreated was Two-Fisted Tales number 36. He redid it for, again, Russ's Complete EC Library, and subsequently it turned up in the collection of Jerry DeFuccio.
Wow.
So after he passed, there was, and I almost thought, oh my God, what other original EC art might be in his collection, but that's the only cover I know of that was recovered from his, personal stash. And again, no one knows quite how he got it or why it didn't resurface when it was known that it was missing, but there you go. It resurfaced and ended up being auctioned through Heritage. And Roger Hill did the restoration of all the text elements, the logos and the emblems and things like that, because all that was missing when the original art was found. Mm-hmm. That's two cases I know of where original art thought to be lost has resurfaced. So there's hope for some of the Vault of Horror covers that Johnny Craig redid for the EC library. Mm-hmm. God knows where they are. And there was a flood in the Craig home in Pennsylvania, and there was original art destroyed. So, it's possible that some of his original EC art was destroyed in the flood that affected his basement.
Wow. Now, has any of this recovered artwork been reproduced anywhere, so someone like me doesn't have to pay $1 zillion for an original?
Well, there's great reproductions of the original art from, like, IDW with the Artist Edition series and things like that.
Okay.
But, Heritage, God bless them for having really, really high-res scans. And if you, whether or not you bid on their auctions, if you're a member of Heritage, you've got access to these really, really, really nice large scans. So anything that they've auctioned, you can at least see it in great detail. And that's where I saw, so now you can get images of Severin's recreation of Two-Fisted Tales 36. You can get it without any of the text elements there. It's just the artwork. And you can also get it with, the restoration that Roger Hill did. And all those images taken together kind of tell a story, but it's all out there now.
Oh, okay, good. I just didn't want it to be like, it was found and then sold to some other rabid collector and end of story. It's like...
these things that are in private collections are tantalizing, but they're frustrating because you do want, and, again, God bless these guys for sharing their collections in things like the Eugene Art Show, because mere mortals I can't afford original cover art at this point,
Yeah.
But I do love to be able to see it, and those artist editions, I don't know if you've got any of the EC artist editions that IDW has put out.
I only got the Mad one, of course.
Yeah, well, the Mad one that's the first one I got, actually.
Yeah.
It just seemed like that was just such a treasure trove of material. But I ended up getting all of them, but that Mad one is, it's I think the thing that makes that unique is that it's also got a lot of Kurtzman's cover roughs, and it's got some production elements in addition to the published art.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But that gives you a good sense of what the art looks like at full size.
Right.
I think it's as close as cheap guys like us are going to get to being able to see it,
Well, I'm probably cheaper than you because, it's like, as far as the Cochrane sets, I only have Mad and Panic, and it's the color Mad to boot. I'd love to have all the other stuff. The only thing my reprints are all the 32-page reprints that they put out during the 90s, and I got a complete run of those. I did have a few originals, but I actually sold them off because, they're starting to skyrocket and I needed money. Of course, now they're way higher now, but other than my Mads and my Panics, I own no original ECs from the 50s, so I'm like, oh, well. But
it's a catch-22, and it really is, especially if you're a collector, because I've got all the Cochrane sets for reading and referencing, because when I started the EC Fanatic Club page, I was reading and referencing my original comics, and, a lot of people would probably gasp and call me a heretic, but I would notice that, like, pieces were flaking off of them as I would leaf through them, because I'm not a condition freak.
Yeah.
And so, some of my comics are well read and worn, and some of them are getting a little flaky. But I thought to myself, the prices on these are going up, and I should try to preserve them. And that's when I finally knuckled under and got the Cochrane sets.
Yeah.
But I've saved all of my comic books. But you talk about you watch the prices skyrocket, and sometimes it's hard not to see dollar signs because this Crime Suspense Stories 22 with the decapitation cover.
Right.
It's gotten hotter than hot, and the prices have gotten ridiculous over the last 5 or 6 years. And I paid $45 for my copy in the year 2000, and it really wasn't valued in Overstreet any higher than number 21 or 23 at the time.
Right.
And I look at that and I go, well, mine's a solid good, and I wonder how much I could get for that now. But then I think, if I did that, because I saw the dollar signs, then I'd be stuck with Crime Suspense Stories 1 through 21 and 23 through 27, and I'd always kick myself for getting rid of that one issue that would have completed the set. So I've been able to control myself thus far, and I haven't cashed in on my original ECs.
Yeah. I think it'd be better for you, but you could do whatever you want. It's your collection. I would sell them as runs. It's like but at a premium. It's like you can get all 27 issues, but it's going to cost you.
Yeah.
Because how easy is it to get the whole set all at once now? In pretty good condition. I'm sure yours are at least very good to find, right?
Yeah, they're fairly nice. I've got some that are beaters, and they tend to be the earliest issues, and it's stuff that I picked up when I was much younger. And so what happened there was, when the prices started to skyrocket, I just threw my upgrade list away because I already had the issues, and when I was younger, I was content just to have them. Mm-hmm. And I didn't get concerned with condition until I was older. And now, if I wanted those same issues to upgrade in really nice condition, it would be, we're back to it's more than I want to pay. So I have that in common with you, is that I refuse to pay ridiculous amounts for things that I know how affordable they were for me, when I was younger.
Yeah, and that makes it tough. Yeah, I agree with you. It's like, if you're paying, I have no problem paying up to $100 on any comic book if I want it bad enough. But it's like, after that, I'm like, is there a reprint out there or something?
Well, when you get into things like that, the really, let's say Gaines file copies. It's I have a Gaines file copy of one of the New Direction comics, and it's just because I wanted to at least have one comic that I knew was a Gaines. But I purchased it very affordably, collector to collector pricing, from another member of the Fanatic Club. And otherwise, I wouldn't have it, because I'm not going to pay $8,000 for a comic book, even if it did belong to Bill Gaines.
Right. So it's amazing to me. People pay It's one thing to say, "Hey, pay me $8,000 for your comic," but I know people are paying that. I don't know them personally. I'd be like, "Wow, are you crazy?" But anyway.
Well, they are folks, and I certainly don't want to disparage them, because more power to them if they can. If they can do it, I wish I could do it. But there are people in the group that you can certainly one-on-one interact with, and I don't know a lot of them personally myself, but they're there, and it's interesting to me how many different levels of fandom there are. There's people who are purely into the history. There's people who are purely into enjoying the stories, and then there's people who are really high rollers who want the best of the best, and it means something to them to have the most pristine copies, whether or not you ever touch them or read them. Yeah. And in most cases you can't, because now they're encapsulated in plastic. But that's their focus, and all of us kind of come together to form this weird dysfunctional family. Yeah.
I'm so glad there's somebody out there that doesn't mind paying the high prices and actually keeping pristine mint copies of these things, because I'd be so terrified that, let's say, if I had one of those much sought after, Haunt of Fear issues or whatever, and then, I lost it in a flood, or, I bent it when I pulled it out or something, it's like, I don't want to have that responsibility.
So. Well, it is. We're kind of caretakers of history in a way, and many is the time that I've looked at my one single Gaines file copy and thought, I really want to crack that out of the slab because I want to be able to touch it and I want to be able to inhale the smell of the fresh printer's ink. But I've resisted so far.
Yeah.
And I do, there's a feeling, and I'm sure anyone that collects can think of an example of something that they either ruined or at least devalued. And it's a horrible feeling because you know that this thing has survived and it's got a story to tell. And somehow you fucked it up. And then you feel like,
Yep.
Great. Why me,
Yeah.
And it's almost like the burden of responsibility of collecting is to try to kind of keep this stuff nice for the future.
I mean, I try to keep my stuff nice, but I wouldn't want to buy, spend a fortune on something that's pristine mint, and just, I wouldn't know what to do with it. I'd be terrified to look at it. It's like, what if it pulls off the staple or something?
I like to be able to visit that stuff, but, and I've got a few things that are really, really nice. And it's funny because for years, my little brother Josh and I, and he's one of my fellow admins of the EC Fanatics page, but we pooled our resources. And when we were very young, that meant putting our allowances together. And when we were a little older and we had our first part-time jobs and things, we would coordinate so that we never bought the same things. And that way we had one collection together that we shared. And as we got older and we moved on and it's college or it's jobs or whatever happens, we always wanted to keep the collection together. So what happened was he ended up getting a complete set of, you mentioned those 90s Russ Cochran reprints. Mm-hmm. He got a complete set of those annuals, and I paid him off for his share. But what we did was figured out what we had really paid for this stuff, whether it was at used bookstores or comic conventions. And then I kind of bought out his half with visitation rights for him for life. Mm-hmm. And it was funny because we never really worried too much about having the most pristine copies. And I've talked to other EC fans about this because if you're at a comic convention and you could buy, for the money in your pocket, you could buy one really, really nice copy of something, or you could buy a pile of other ECs, you'd go for the quantity.
Yeah.
It was a matter of how many more can I afford, and you didn't worry so much about the condition. So, collecting was a little different, I think, when we were much younger.
Yeah. I mean, you may or may not know I'm the Harvey guy, so it's like I collected Harveys. And,
I do know that.
Yeah.
I know you're a Harvey guy and a cracked guy.
Yeah, so it was always.
I know all about you.
Okay, he gets. It was always quantity over quality. It's like, I could get cracked number 1. I'll use that as an example, but here's number 40 through 85. I think I'll get those.
But
and it
was.
And
it was quantity over quality, knowing that everything you got was going to be quality aesthetically to you, as far as your enjoyment was concerned.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I guess a lot of us, hindsight's 20/20, and I would have gotten that Weird Science Fantasy 29 in better condition, or that Crime Suspense Stories number 22 in better condition, or I would have bought the Mad number 1 when it was only $40 compared to $850, or whatever the case is at the time. I just wanted more.
Yeah. I remember when I first found out about the values of Mad and stuff like that, and this is the 1976 price guide, and it said Mad number 1 was $150 in mint. And I go, I'll never be able to buy that, because I thought that was a fortune, $150, and it's like, I did spend more than that, like I said, but, it's like, shifting gears a little bit, obviously your interest in all things EC and the ability to write has gotten you some different jobs writing about EC.
Yes.
I was just kind of curious, how did you get the gig doing, I don't know if you've done it for every one of them, but certainly a lot of them, the black and white volumes that Fantagraphics has been putting them out?
So, the ECR's Library series, I've been doing those now for 3 or 4 years. I started with, there was a Cayman horror volume called Daddy Lost His Head, and that was the first one that I did for them. So prior to that, they had Bill Mason writing the introductions, and he's a first-generation EC fan. And they also had some of those names you might recognize, like Fred von Bernowitz, who did the EC and MAD checklists back in the 50s and 60s. And Larry Stark, who Bill Gaines named EC's #1 fan. So I felt like I was in very, very good company, but those guys preceded me. And the reason I got that gig was because Bob Stewart, another first-generation fan, and the guy that I would actually probably credit with giving birth to EC fandom, because he did the very first EC fanzine in 1953 called the EC Fan Bulletin. And that was actually the inspiration for the official EC Fan Addict Club that EC officially launched with the EC Fan Addict Bulletin. They kind of co-opted Bob Stewart's fanzine name. But Bob was someone who I was in touch with online, and when he was doing a greatly expanded and updated version of his Wallace Wood collection, I think the original one was published by Two Morrows, and it was called Against the Grain. Oh, yeah. And he was working with Fantagraphics on a greatly expanded version of it, and he was a member of the EC Fanatic Club, and this was in 2013, and I just started this thing off. So one day I get an email from Bob Stewart, and he said, I think you're doing a great job with the Fanatic Club, and you've got to keep this a secret for now, but I'm working on something with Wallace Wood, and I've got a lot of material collected, but I don't have anything on the Preachies. And I thought, okay, well, that's really cool. And at the time, he had just put me in touch with Larry Stark, and he'd actually asked me if I could pick, just handpick a few Wallace Wood stories, Xerox them, and send them to Larry. Because he said he thought it would be great to get Larry to do EC story reviews like he did in the 50s. So when he's talking about the Preachies, I immediately assumed, okay, you want me to pitch this to Larry Stark, or it's got to involve Larry somehow. And so he wrote back and he said, rather than Larry doing this chapter, though, why don't you do it? And I told him, I've never written before. I'm not a professional writer. And he said, but I think you're doing a great job with the Fanatic Club page, and why don't you give it a shot? And I'm so glad that he did, because I immersed myself in research and revisiting these stories. And so I wrote a chapter for Life and Legend of Wallace Wood is what it ultimately came to be, and it was a 2-volume set from Fantagraphics. And my chapter is called Waking Up from the American Dream. And this is something I've never talked about with anyone, but that title came about because Bob said, I don't know what we're going to call it, though. It's got to have kind of a, because all the chapters in this Life and Legend of Wallace Wood had clever titles or plays on the name Wood. And so he was calling it Wood Chips. And that was just a place saver title. We were never going to call it that. But he suggested a few things, and a couple of his suggestions were like, The American Scream was one of them. And I thought, well, what about Waking Up from the American Dream? And he just wrote back, perfect. And so I thought my head swelled, and my hat sized because Bob Stewart thought I had a cool title. But once I had done that, I had kind of an in with Fantagraphics, and so I wrote to Gary Groth at the time, and I said, are you interested in something for the Comics Journal on the history of EC fanzines, and EC fandom as a whole? And I'm in touch with Bob Stewart, I'm in touch with Larry Stark, I'm talking to these guys, and what do you think? And he said, yeah, that might be an interesting feature in the Comics Journal. So I ran away with it, and I sent it in to them thinking that it would be in the Comics Journal, either print or online or whatever. I didn't care. And he wrote back and said, how would you feel about putting it in the EC interview books? They had done the EC Artists Part 1 for the Comics Journal library. And Part 2, he said, how about if we end it with your EC fandom history? And once I got done picking my jaw up off the floor, I said, yes, I would be agreeable with that. And so that was my in with Fantagraphics, doing that Wallace Wood thing for Bob Stewart, and then doing the history of EC fandom for the Comics Journal library. And one day, just out of the blue, I got an email from Mike Catron, who is the editor of that EC Artist Library series. And he said, how would you feel about writing an introduction? And so I didn't know which artist it would be. I didn't know what genre it would be. And I just said, yes, I would love to do it. And So that first one was a horror collection for Jack Kamen, and since then I've done war collections on Davis and Wood, and pre-trend and crime and early horror collections on Johnny Craig and Al Feldstein, and I've done a Graham Ingalls collection, and it's been really nice it's caused me to revisit these stories and to also read them in that artist-centric way. It has kind of opened up new narratives to me, because I've been used to reading the old comics and issue by issue, and to read a body of work by a single artist has been very interesting, and I think it's a very interesting way to present the stories. And some people love them, some people hate them, but it's been a very cool way to present the material in a collected form that they've never been offered before. These artist-centric volumes. So I am still writing for those. There's a couple upcoming now on Graham Ingalls and George Evans. I think the Graham Ingalls is due next month, and the George Evans early next year. But I'm happy to do those as long as they would like me to do them.
Now, do you have any say-so in story selection, or is it already done, and they just say, here's the next book?
Well, they've kind of got that worked out to an ultimate 40 volumes, and I think that's something that probably Mike Ketron and Gary Gross sat down and sort of semi-plotted these out. But one thing that they hadn't planned on doing was including so much pre-trend material, and that's something that I didn't have a direct influence on, but I'm certainly very encouraging of. And I will tell you a story as far as I do have a little bit of influence over some of the content, because I'm obsessed with minutia, and I don't know if you know this or not, and you probably do from just browsing the Fanatic page, but when those really famous Ballantine collections of EC comics came out in the mid-'60s, so Ballantine was publishing the EC paperbacks, or the Mad paperbacks, and then they did some collections of EC comics.
Right.
Well, for continuity's sake, they actually altered some of the original artwork in the 60s, and there's pastovers and actually artwork that was changed on the original boards that all subsequent reprints have reflected. So in instances where I could catch changes in dialogue or just little things, we've been able to correct those for the Fantagraphics series.
So you're trying to get
what was originally published.
Oh, okay, you're trying to get the original version each time. Okay, that's cool.
Kind of restoration to what was originally published in the comics in the 50s, and not what's been perpetuated down through the decades because of the alterations to the artwork for the Ballantine paperbacks. But the most major one, and this afternoon I was actually hanging out with one of my fellow Fanatic Club admins, John Goffold, and we were talking about Blind Alleys, which was in the final issue of Tales from the Crypt. And in that final issue of Tales from the Crypt, that story was presented by the Vault Keeper. But for continuity's sake, the artwork was changed so that the host was the Crypt Keeper for the Ballantine Tales from the Crypt paperback. And all subsequent reprints have reflected that change to the Crypt Keeper. And I guess I'm giving away a secret right now, but the George Evans horror collection that's going to be coming from Fantagraphics, we were able to restore the Vault Keeper and his original dialogue in crisp black and white for the first time. There's a scoop for you.
So it was actually the revised version in the Cochrane books and the 32-page floppies, or whatever you want to call them, and everything else, all these years?
It's been the Crypt Keeper in the EC archives, the digitally recolored series, and in Russ Cochrane's complete EC library, the Tales from the Crypt volumes have the altered artwork. So even the dialogue doesn't really make sense in some cases because it's reflecting the continuity of the paperbacks and not the original comic books. I will give Russ Cochrane credit because in the 32-page floppy of that issue, he cut and pasted the Vault Keeper in, but, and this is again deep minutia, but the word balloon shapes are wrong, and the actual dialogue is wrong because he had to fit it into the incorrect word balloons that were created for the Ballantine paperback. So the Fantagraphics collection is going to be the first time that it's presented exactly as it was printed in the original comic.
Wow. Okay.
So, and that's you know, when you talk about me influencing any of the content, it's more that obsession to detail stuff that maybe 99% of the reading audience wouldn't know about, but that the hardcore EC fans will hopefully appreciate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it does give you something different to collect, I guess. It's like, if you for the person who has everything, let's say you have all the Cochrane stuff, you can say, well, there's something else that you don't have because
exactly.
we did it this way.
Well, it's funny because that question gets asked often is, how many times are we going to rebuy the same material? And my answer to that is, well, as long as it keeps being presented in new and exciting ways, we're going to keep rebuying it. So, you've got that Mad Artists edition. You have all the material elsewhere, but do you have it presented at that scale, scanned from the original artwork? That makes it worth having, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's like, how many times do I need reprints of the comic book Mad? I mean, I have them in those little paperbacks that came out a couple of years ago that, they did a Wally Wood, a Bill Elder, and a Jack Davis edition. But I love those. They're like, it's handy because they put all the stories together in one volume. So I was like, okay.
Yes.
And
it presents it in a new way.
Yeah. I wish they did a fourth volume that had, like, everybody else, like, put all the Severin material and all the other stuff that they didn't fit in the other thing, but I get what they're trying to do. But
right. Well, it's funny because my brother, he loves to say that any affordable reprint volume that he can take on vacation and not worry about the condition of it is good. So we'll rebuy it because it gives us an edition that we can manhandle and read and enjoy and not worry about the condition of it. That's another thing that John and I were talking about earlier today was every successive generation has had a different way to be able to experience this material, but the fact is that the material is still out there, and that's a beautiful thing. Yeah.
Well, the thing I wanted so badly, I'll sandwich this story in there because I didn't say it earlier. My first exposure, I think I may have mentioned to you before, or on the page on the Facebook page, was in Bananas magazine. They did an article about EC horror comics, and they explained, yes, it was by the same guys who did Mad and blah 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 blah, everything like that. But at the time, the only thing that was really out there was the big book and the 12 issues of East Coast Comics, and that's it. And it's like, I want all of them. I want them now. It's like, now you can get all of them. I mean, if you can't get the originals, you can get the reprints, or you can get them in artist editions, or you can get the recolored editions, or, however,
Well, that's what I think it's important for people to know that, regardless of the format that you prefer, all of this material is still under copyright, and it's still in print. So you're absolutely right. If you want to read every EC comic, you still can. In multiple different ways, you can experience them. And, I don't think that's going to end. I think, we'll always have those eureka moments where people are discovering this amazing material.
Yeah. Now, have you written anything for any other volumes? Like, I don't have what is now known as the bigger book. I don't have that yet. Didn't you write something for that too, or is that all Grant Geisman's work?
No, that's all Geisman. Okay. John Gossold, I mentioned earlier, he did a lot of, he's in the acknowledgments, and he must have had some pretty intense involvement, because I think Grant says something to the effect of, it's a better book because of John's input. But I know that he was involved with a lot of the, whether it was proofreading or just kind of previewing the material and having input there. The only real vicarious mention that my brother and I got is there's a section about the big book where it actually says Latter-day EC fans affectionately refer to this as the big book because it's where they discovered EC, or words to that effect. And Grant did confirm to me, oh yeah, that's about you guys, because he didn't remember anyone ever calling it that when the big book came out. But my brother and my nickname for it is kind of caught on, and just to see it referenced in Grant's new massive history of EC comics was, I have to admit, I got a little smile on my face.
Well, I have to admit, I never called it the big book. I just called it the Nostalgia Press book. That impossible to find book at a decent price. No,
yeah,
but
the book that you can't afford.
But, I did finally get it, and yeah, it is a pretty decent-sized book, and, but then I've seen the comparisons but those Taschen things, it's like, I contributed to the Marvel Comics one that Roy Thomas did, and...
Yeah.
I think that one even commanded a higher price than the EC one, if I remember correctly. And I saw a copy up in the rare book room up in Powell's bookstore in Portland, Oregon. And I flipped through it, and I saw my name in there in the acknowledgments. So I quickly whipped out my camera and took a picture of that page. I said, if I don't get the book right now, at least I could see that I got my name in the book.
That's cool.
So one of these days I'll get, and it's like, it was just because... Roy needed, like, really odds and ends weird stuff, and, of course, I always have that, It's like,
yes.
oh, you need a copy of Crazy Magazine? Sure. Oh, you need a copy of Little Pals? Oh, sure, I got that. Little
Okay.
Kids, anything really obscure Marvel's put out, I probably have it. Haven't done that with EC, and I'm wondering, I was going to ask you this. I mean, how extensive is your EC collection? Does it just cover all the new trend and that type of stuff, or do you go into Fat and Slat and international comics and those type of things as well?
A few of those. I have a few of the pre-trends, and just because I'm not obsessively collecting them, and I come across them affordably, it's hard to resist. The new directions I have. Everything except Aces High number 5 I still need. So my want list is burned in my memory. The new trend, I have almost everything. I'm just missing Mad number 1 and Weird Fantasy number 1. And I also don't have all of Kurtzman's War comics. So that wasn't something I was pursuing until within the last couple of years, because I almost had everything else. And then I thought, well, I don't have the Kurtzman War stuff, and I don't want to, cause a mad scramble to get the Kurtzman War books, but I will tell you that they're comparatively very, very affordable compared to the horror stuff, so I am about halfway on the Kurtzman War stuff, so that's where I am. I have almost everything, but I'm missing, a few things here and there.
Mm-hmm. How about what do they call them? There's some the magazines that Feldstein did at the tail end.
The Pictofiction.
Pictofiction, thank you. I couldn't think of that.
The Pictofictions. I have a handful of those, and I'm kicking myself because I had those early on. My brother and I would buy anything with an EC emblem on it, and then when we decided that we wanted to focus strictly on the horror comics, we traded, or we got rid of our science fiction and pictofictions and panics and things that weren't horror, and then we ended up trying to buy all that stuff back after we completed the horror runs. So the pictofictions I'm not complete on, and I actually had a copy of Shock Illustrated number 3, and that's by far the hardest one to get, right?
Yeah.
And I had that one for a while, and when I found out that I keep mentioning John Goffold, but when I found out that he had a complete collection of new trend, new direction, and pictofiction, except for that issue, I magnanimously sold him my copy for what I paid for it, thinking that I would never be pursuing a full set. And now here we are about 5 years later, and I've almost closed in on a full set of everything. So, sometimes I wistfully remember when I had that Shock Illustrated 3, but they're out there. I'm sure I'll have another chance at one someday.
Yeah. That one is... I have all the Pictofictions, and it's a funny story about that. It was in San Diego Comic Convention, and somebody was selling all of them, except they didn't have Shock 3, and they didn't have the Confessions Illustrated magazines.
Okay.
But I got all the other ones, and I said, and they were fairly priced. They're like $20-$30 a piece or something, and it's like,
right.
Mine.
No, that's nothing.
Yeah.
That's very good, actually, because those have spiked in value now, too.
And I haven't really seen them since, and then when I did get that Cochran set. I forgot that I did get that one when it came out, because, for some reason I just, was... the format really interested me. That they did something that basically failed, that Warren kind of redid a few years later with Creepy and Eerie and made it work.
Yeah, it was very successful years later.
Yeah, And I always think, it was probably the timing of it all. And, of course, they still had their EC logo. They probably should have taken that off the cover.
They should have. Hindsight's 20/20.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think they should have just done straight comic stories like Creepy did and not do so much text. It's probably too much reading for the...
That Cochrane set is a must-have. Whether or not you get any of the other Cochrane sets, that one has 19 stories that were never published in the 50s.
Yeah, and that was the reason why I wanted it, too, is like it had a lot of unpublished stuff. So I said, okay, I'll dip into that one.
Yep, must-have. And actually, for a while, that was the only Cochrane set that I had. Because I don't know if I already mentioned this, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself, but having all of the original comics in color, I couldn't see a reason to get new reprints in black and white. But then that Pictofiction set came out, and of course I did get it because it had all those unpublished stories. That's what started my Cochrane collection, was that one set.
Yeah. Well, they're beautiful and they're big. That's the thing that's, it's like, even if they were in color, it's like, well, the Mad one's in color, and it's like, I still love it, that's the one I reference all the time. I'm not digging out my old Mads.
It's funny, I had the Mad set in color for years, and when I finally scored a black and white Mad set, I sold my color one, and, a few of my friends thought I was a complete idiot, because they thought, well, why don't you want it in black and white and color? And I thought, well, I've got the original comics in color, and the black and white set matches all the rest of my EC library sets. Yeah.
I still want
It's a tough one to score.
I still want a black and white one. I almost had an opportunity to get one recently, but, again, I've had to put other finances ahead of, my own personal
Well, they're not
thing.
cheap when you do find. There were only 1,000 black and white ones.
Yeah, I know that.
They're not cheap.
And I don't know why I didn't know about it when it came out, but it's like, it wasn't until years later I go, there's a black and white one? I thought that they had to do it in color, and there was never going to be a black and white one ever. And I go, oh, well, except for having the old paperbacks, I guess I won't see this artwork in black and white, and then...
Well, this actually came straight from Russ, but the only reason there was a black and white set was that Bill Gaines wanted one to match his other EC library sets. So then Russ was like, well, damn it, I got to print them up. So he made them available to his charter subscribers, but it was never widely available.
Yeah, and never widely publicized. Never widely publicized until years later, because I've paid attention to anything Mad's done over the years, even if I couldn't afford it, and I never even heard about it until years later, and I go, damn it, my collection's not complete.
Nobody knew about it.
But one of these days I'll get one. I always think, and this has happened before, I'll walk into some comic store one day and they'll just have it on some high shelf. Nobody's been paying attention to it, and it's like, oh, you want it here, and
there'll be dust all over the top of it.
But someday.
Well, that's what's so great about collecting. There's always something new to try to find.
Right. I mean, it's like, going back to when Lee sold me the Mad #1, he says, now your collection is complete. And I go, well, no. I mean,
it's never complete.
It is on the regular issues, but I'm still getting the current issues, and do I get all the foreign Mads? Do I get, do I get like every variation on paperbacks, which some people do? Some
people do. Some people in our very group do.
I mean, I just found out recently, it's like the one paperback of Howling Mad. Apparently it has a white moon on various covers, but on one of them it has a yellow moon, and that one's worth a lot more money. It's like, really? Yeah.
Well, that's right. You mentioned the new direction for EC, and there was that first issue of Impact. The first printing had a white logo. Second printing has a yellow logo.
Yeah.
So if you really want to be complete, you've got to have both,
And I know people that do.
For all these things where you go, yes, I scored. Then you find out about something and you go, damn it, now I need that.
Yeah, and then there's variations of Mad 28 with the spring cover, it's like the little tag in the corner, it's like, jeez. And I had to get them all,
right?
you know. It's like, and then, well, later, years later, they did the Mad. This issue of Mad 123, Mad 123 is number 1,269,000 whatever of 2,148,000. Collect them all, and it's like, you know, they only did 4 variations, but I had to get all 4 variations, so you know, it's like, it's crazy.
It's a mania.
So who have you met over the years as far as original creators? Did you meet Gaines ever in your travels or anything like that, or anybody else?
No, it's actually kind of funny because for as obsessed as I was with EC Comics, it never really occurred to me that I could actually reach out and meet these guys. And, you know, much to my dismay, my grandfather lived in Mifflintown, Pennsylvania. And for us to visit him at least twice a year when we were kids, and that big book would always ride on our laps in the back seat. My brother and I took it everywhere with us. And so, you know, to get to Mifflintown, you had to drive through Camp Hill. And Johnny Craig lived in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania.
Oh, wow.
And we would ride through there at least a couple times a year with that big book on our laps, never knowing that Johnny Craig lived right there. It just, you know, I thought these guys were giants. It never occurred to me that you could reach out and just contact them. And even when I started the Fanatic Club, getting in touch with Bob Stewart, I couldn't believe that I was actually in touch with him. And when he put me in touch with Larry Stark, I couldn't believe it. And so ultimately, the only original EC artist that I'm now in touch with is Angelo Torres, because sadly everyone else is gone now.
Right.
and you know, it's one of those great missed opportunities, because I realize now that a lot of these guys were very friendly and very willing to talk about their history, and they were welcoming of fans, and I don't know if I was shy and withdrawn, or if it just never occurred to me that, you know, you can reach out and find these guys.
Yeah.
And I didn't, but you know, it's kind of a blessing to still be able to be in touch with Angelo Torres, and you know, there's an original EC artist still doing EC inspired art. You know, it makes the world a beautiful place.
Right. And, you know, I think I was the same way, you know. It's like, yeah, I thought all these guys were gods. And, you know, and I had intense shyness. You wouldn't tell from me doing a podcast. But, you know, this is after years and years of interviewing a ton of people. And I go, oh, okay, this works, this doesn't work, and everything like that. The only ones I met in person, I think, were like Russ Heath. And...
Okay.
I'm trying to think. Al Jaffe I met, but he's not officially EC. He's like at the tail end of Mad, but you know, but
he is actually, because when Mad still had an EC logo on the cover, I think he wrote something for Mad when it still had an EC logo. So you can count Al Jaffe.
Yeah, he was on a couple of those last Kurtzman issues. It was How to Play Golf, and he had artwork in there too, or something like that. So, so I met him, and I missed the big reunion in 2000. I'd go to San Diego Comic Convention almost every year. And 2000, I just said, I need a break. And that was the year that everybody got together. Fortunately, I have videos and stuff like that, but not the same.
That was another one, because I actually was aware of it. And, you know, I was obsessively into EC at the time, but I was also in rock and roll bands at that age, and I was touring around, and I don't even remember what the conflict was, but I was like, oh yeah, there's a big EC thing going on, but I can't make it. Yeah. And you don't realize, you know, time's running out, you know. But it's just a lot of missed opportunities.
Yeah. So I tried to make amends after that. That was probably when things switched for me, which is the year 2000, because, you know, I said, I gotta talk to these guys, anybody, before they're gone. So I did talk to, you know, you mentioned Cracked. You know, when I did the Cracked books, you know, I found out, wow, Angelo Torres and Jack Davis and Al Jaffe all drew for Cracked, very briefly, but they did. And so I called him up, you know, and I talked to him on the phone, and both Torres and Jaffe said, I never worked for Cracked. so I had to send them copies of their work, and they said, oh, I guess I did.
Oh, yeah. I guess I was there.
So, and then when I talked to Davis, he was a sweetheart, but, and supposedly he never had a bad thing to say about anything, but he did about Cracked. He said, I tried to work for Cracked, but they didn't pay enough. I had to go, It's like, so.
I love how candid these guys can be sometimes,
Yeah.
Because there's no malice. It's just them kind of telling you how it is.
Yeah. The only ones I wish I met, because I'm more the mad guy, obviously, is, I did meet Feldstein. He was really nice, even though, people have said he's really crotchety and stuff. But I think I got him on a good... He
could be, but I think he got over that.
I think I got him on a good day. But also, he was marveling at some of my knowledge about Mad. I said, I remember seeing you on the Mike Douglas show in 1978. And he goes, you watched that? It's like, wow! It was for Mad's 25th anniversary, and you were on there. And I told him what he said, and he says, son of a gun. It's like, wow. So he's like my buddy after that, because he didn't think anybody saw that show.
That's awesome.
But I wish I met Kurtzman and Elder. Those are the two, but oh well.
Yeah. Well, Sergio we run into out here every once in a while.
I met Sergio.
So he's not, of course, an EC guy, but a Mad guy. But he's always bopping around, and he's always super, super fast. Like, every time, I don't think he remembers me from the last time he saw me, but he always acts like he does, and that makes me feel good.
Yeah. Well, he was the first Mad guy I ever met. He came to... I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and he came to a local bookstore that's long gone in 1978, and... I was in heaven. I didn't care who it was. He was, probably my second favorite guy on Mad, because I love Don Martin, of course. And I met Don Martin, too, at one point. But, it's like, at 12 years old, it's like, Sergio.
Yeah.
Years later I met him again, and I told him I met him when I was like 12 years old at this bookstore, and he acted like he remembered me. He probably didn't, but he's giving me lip service.
Exactly, but it makes you feel great,
But here's the kicker, and this is an absolutely true story, so I have to tell you this. Nobody's going to ask me this. So I was in line at this. It was a bookstore called the Booksellers. It was just called the Booksellers. That was the name of it, and there's a person taking pictures for the newspaper, and the guy took a picture. I don't know who took the picture, but took a picture of this mother and her kid in line right in front of me. And it made it into the paper. And I still have the article now, Anyway, flash forward probably 20 years, 25 years maybe. And I'm seeing Sergio, which I've seen many times, in San Diego, and I'm just chit-chatting with him and everything like that. And this tall guy and this very elderly mother of his walks up with this clipping, the same exact clipping, and he says, this is me when I was 10 years old, and this is my mother, and she's here now. And I told him, I said, you know where I am in this picture? And they go, where? Right out of frame. I'm right behind you guys. No way! And it's like, it was true.
Great.
Because I remember when they took the photo, and it's like, and I knew it was them, and I was right behind them, and it's like, I was kind of hoping I'd get in the shot, but...
Stranger than fiction. Have you ever posted that? You must have posted that.
That story?
Have you posted that?
That story, I don't know if I've told it, or I might have put it on my blog once. I don't know, but I mean, it's like
that's a good one.
And just that I happen to be talking with Sergio, and they happen to show up. It's the same time. Anyway,
very cool.
So, we've been talking over an hour. I just we could probably talk for hours here.
Probably.
You mentioned some of the other projects coming up, but are there any other writing projects besides the EC artist editions or anything else that you're working on?
Well, unfortunately, those artist editions have been delayed now, so the big one that's coming up that's EC related is the EC Covers Artists Edition, and Scott Dunbier, who edits those things, has landed many covers that have not been presented before.
Oh.
So it's going to be one of those, like, Grant's book is a big event. It's kind of a happening, and everybody who gets their copy posts about it, and it's a must-have book. And I think the next one is probably going to be the EC Artist Edition covers book. And I did write the introduction for that.
Okay.
So, that was going to be out for SDCC, which, of course, it didn't happen this year. I don't know if you noticed, but 2020 has been a little weird.
Yes.
And so it's been pushed back because all of those artist editions have been pushed back. I think there's an X-Men volume, and there's a few things coming. So the EC one I think it's a few months down the road now, but I am confident in saying that one's going to be the next huge must-have EC publication, because it's going to be all covers, all scanned at full size. It's like we talked about earlier. It's going to be the next best thing to seeing the original art, and he has landed a lot of covers that I don't want to give anything away, but it's going to be a fantastic collection. And I think in addition to, it's not news to you that EC Comics no longer has the rights to Mad Magazine, right? Or Mad Comics. It's all DC now and Warner Brothers.
Right.
But there may be a little madness in the next EC Artist Edition. That's all I'm going to say.
Okay. Very cool.
So look forward to that.
All right. Well, I really enjoyed talking with you. If people want to get in contact with you or join the Facebook page, how do they get in touch with you?
The EC Fan Addicts Club on Facebook, I think we're at like 6.6 thousand members now, but you can get in touch with me directly through there and be one of the maybe 50 people out of that 6.6 thousand that's not just a lurker. So, and I do try, because I value my position as the EC answer man, so I'm very open to any kind of questions, any comments, anything, anything you want to know about EC, just ask me. Much to my wife's chagrin, I'm always available to talk EC. So, but the EC Fan Addict Club on Facebook is probably the best way. I've got an EC Fan Addict channel on YouTube as well. Cool. And actually, I'm also EC Fan Addict on Instagram. So across the major social media platforms, you can find me as EC Fan Addict.
Very cool. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Thommy, for being my special guest today. And we'll have to do this again sometime. I mean, there's always something to talk about. Maybe when the next book comes out, I'll call you again about this.
Absolutely. I might hold you to that.
Okay.
I knew this was going to be fun, but it was even more fun than I thought.
Hey, cool. That's what people try to say, and I try to make it fun and make it easy. It's like, hey, it's just like a long-distance phone call from an old friend, It's like, and we'll just shoot the breeze, but the breeze is about
Thanks,
EC.
Mark.
Thank you for listening, and thank you, Thommy Burns, for being my special guest. And episode number 95 will be coming soon. If you would like to comment and or be a guest on this podcast, please drop me a line at funideas.mark@gmail.com. Become a patron of Mark Arnold and Fun Ideas Productions. If everyone listening just contributed $1 a month, that would be a tremendous help in continuing the production of my books and this podcast. Also, subscribe to my YouTube channel. The opening and closing music for the Fun Ideas podcast is provided courtesy of Andrew the Slow Poisoner Goldfarb and is used with permission. This has been the Fun Ideas podcast. This is Mark Arnold speaking. This episode is copyright 2020, Fun Ideas Productions. Thank you, and good night.
Headed home to a cardboard hut with duct tape doors. At the price I'm paying, be glad it isn't yours. Now get up, Crab Mountain, get up. 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 That mountain of crab. And don't fall